Welcome to the Personality Couch podcast, where we discuss all things personality and clinical practice. I'm your host, Doc Bach, and I'm here with my co-host, Doc Fish. We are both licensed clinical psychologists in private practice, and today we will be talking about what personality is, why we have so many ways to classify it, and how it became a thing. Let's dive in. All right. So Doc Fish, before we get into all this good psych talk, tell me about your media consumption. What have you been binging on lately? Are you more of a Netflix person? Do you do podcasts or other streaming services? What's your jam?
Sure. I don't have a TV actually, but I am on an audiobook kick. So probably 2-3 months ago, I was straight 6 months. I was on serial killer audiobooks. So that was fun. Now I moved on to a little bit more like mystery, thriller. Yeah. Just the antisocial, psychopathic. It's interesting to me. So that's what I was doing. So now I'm on a mystery thriller kind of deal.
Oh my goodness. That is so interesting. Firstly, that you are interested in psychopathology or psychopathy. And is it true crime or is it fiction, nonfiction?
Yeah, it's fiction. It's definitely fiction. So not true crime. True crime doesn't always have a good conclusion. So I don't like to be left hanging on that. So just serial killer books. Yeah, I don't know. I am fascinated with darkness. That's a whole thing I could dive into. That's probably not for today, but fascinating.
I think we could have a whole nother podcast on that, on true crime, there are so many podcasts on that already, but I think I share that interest with the what makes this person tick and more the dark side of things. So I initially thought I was going to be doing more criminal profiling, and I had an interest in forensic psychology, and then that kind of morphed into clinical practice, private practice, psychological testing, personality disorders. So I see that similar path with you, Cheyenne, that interest, the intrigue, like what is going on behind the curtain?
Right. Well, so what attracted you to criminal forensic work? Like what did you like that you were going to pursue that?
Oh, yeah. So, Criminal Minds, the TV show, when I was in graduate school, the classes were interesting and I loved psychopathology, advanced psychopathology, all those classes that we had to take that really got into the meat and potatoes of disorder level functioning.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted something more. And I think a friend, or maybe it was even my mom, introduced me to Criminal Minds. And we would just watch it for hours. And every time it was on, my roommates and I would turn on the television. And I was so intrigued by the ability to understand the psyche, that the scene of the crime it's their canvas. And each criminal has their own kind of artistic brushstroke, if you will, and being able to piece that together and come up with a personality profile based on their behavior, past crimes, past behavior. And I was just like, how can I do that? So that's a whole nother story. But and here I am as a testing psychologist doing it in a different capacity, not on the forensic side or, post-crime, but piecing together people. It's fascinating.
That is so cool. And I heard you use the word creative. There's a creative aspect of it that fits with what I know about you. But that it's also contradictory to what I was thinking with like darkness and psychopathology. It's authentic. So they're not following the rules. They're not doing what is expected of them, right? They're just being their own person, which isn't acceptable, and it's authentic. I don't know.
Interesting.
So it's just so interesting. But I'll digress. I will get wrapped up in that topic. I love it so much.
Me too. I could keep asking so many questions about that. Right? I mean, this makes sense. This makes so much sense why we are both interested in personality. Yeah. I didn't even answer your last question about what I've been watching. Not Criminal Minds as of late. It started to turn a little too gory for me, and I had to stop watching it. But I've been on an Amazing Race kick with the family. So this is an old show that's been around for decades now. So we're on like the early 2000s watching it. And it's, I don't know if you're familiar with it, Cheyenne, but they cast teams of 2 people, and they travel the world and have to do crazy things, eat crazy things, sleep very little. And at the end, the winner wins $1 million.
Okay. So we have the prize at the end.
Yeah. There's a reason why. There's a reason why people do it. But the characters that are cast, it's always so interesting because they want, certain people that fit certain types, like, oh, we need a person that's like this, or we need a person like this. And my family and I are always joking. We're like, okay, where's the latent narcissist this season? Like, where are they? Because these types of shows often attract high narcissism because of the competitive nature of it. I think any reality show, you're going to have probably a higher proportion of people with high narcissistic traits, because either drawn to the limelight or it makes good TV. It's interesting. It creates drama. Put someone with high narcissism in the middle of that, and they'll clamor. But yeah, and the competitiveness of it. So you're going to have high assertiveness, high narcissism, but it's interesting. It's interesting. So yeah, even the things we do for fun have to do with personality in some type of way, which is interesting.
Of course. Yeah. Well, I mean, because people have personalities and people are everywhere and in everything.
Yes, absolutely. Well, let's get into like, why did personality become a thing?
Yes. Okay. Yes. So why did personality become a thing? I think my first thought is just at the foundation, we want to understand the world, right? And our brains are wired to make categories, right? Because there's so much data, there's so much differences. And so in order to understand, we also need to group things together, right? So how people are alike and how they are different. And we have an extensive history of sorting and categorizing people, right? So physical traits, of course, culture, socioeconomic status, right? Even like Harry Potter houses.
Yeah.
Or the Hunger Games. Like those are great examples of how we are just sorting and categorizing.
Yes.
And then I think too, like differences between people, right? We react to differences that are threatening in some way, or that we're pulled or we're pushed by certain types of people or dynamics. Just a simple example, I'm sure that you're not going to like the same types of people or the same exact people that I would.
Right.
Because we're so different. And even our dynamic, right? Somehow we ended up here. But if one of us or both of us had different personalities, maybe we wouldn't be here. I also was thinking, with the different dynamics, right? Even just personalities of like even pets. Right? So even how pets interact with people, oh my goodness, other animals or just their environment. I have lots of stories about pets and their different personalities. But what about you, Duck Buck?
Mm-hmm.
Any pets come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, thinking about personality, I think everyone who's a pet owner can say, oh, yeah, my pets, my dogs, my cats have different personalities. One of the things that I'm thinking about right now as we're talking about this is my parents' dogs. So they have two little dogs, a Lapso Apso and a Shih Tzu mix, I think. So they look very similar. They're similar breeds, but their personalities could not be more different. So the one is very social. She will bring her food into the living room when everyone's sitting in the living room, like she's a social creature.
Oh.
And she wants to be on your lap and petted at all times. Like she will want her belly rubbed. She will stand on her hind legs like a groundhog with her paws up so that you rub her belly. She just wants constant attention. You can play with her ears, you can play with her feet, and she's or her paws, not her feet, and she loves it. She's just like, love me, yes, I'm Queen Bee. And then their other dog is not this way. He's kind of a grump.
Oh.
And he only likes certain people. So he really likes my husband and will just howl when he comes. But some people he's standoffish towards and he'll bite. And you don't know what mood he's going to be in. Sometimes you'll be petting him and he'll start growling because he doesn't like the way you're petting him or all of a sudden wants you to stop, even though he's the one that jumped on your lap in the first place.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yes, pets are a great example of personality, even in animals.
Yeah.
We can tell when there's a difference. And like I said, anyone who's a pet owner, I think, can speak to differences in their pets' personalities.
That's so interesting. And while you were telling that, I was thinking, I can think of some people that are like that too. Right? Because it just goes right back to personality. Mm-hmm. Right? But like there's people that are like, love me, love me, love me. And there's people that are like, maybe I like you. I'm cautious. If you cross my boundaries or do something I don't like, I might bite. I know my two little dogs, both Yorkie poodles, completely different. I would say my firstborn thinks that she is a human. She is very autonomous, demanding. Mm-hmm. She doesn't anymore. She used to sit at the kitchen table on her own chair and just pretend that she was an adult.
What?
Part of the family. She didn't get food, but she also didn't like eat the food, which is good. She was trained very well. And then we had our second. She is the Sour Patch Kid. That's what I call her. She's the sweetest little thing.
Okay.
Perhaps not all there. She may not all be there. She's so sweet. You can hold her like a baby, rub her tummy. Like she's so docile and so destructive when you leave. Oh. Like if there is a little toy that is murdered and there's stuffing everywhere, that's the little one.
Oh my gosh. Maybe some separation anxiety?
It might be some separation anxiety. I do think so. Mm-hmm. I do. But even the way that they interact with each other is interesting. How they interact with the different people around them. So I heard, I would have to look into this. I have heard that specifically dogs, I don't know about all animals, but they view children as like a completely different species. So not just like young humans, but just like a different animal. And so they react differently to them, which I thought Thought that was interesting.
Wow, that is.
But speaking of kiddos, right?
Uh-huh.
Children in general, like if we're talking about personality, kiddos are raw form beings, right? They're not quite refined yet. They don't have that little prefrontal cortex that helps them make better decisions. They are very much a raw personality form. What are your thoughts on that topic?
Yeah. It's interesting. I've seen, I work with kiddos 6 and up in clinical practice, but one of the things that we always assess for when we are collecting social history for a first appointment, even for testing and for therapy both, we ask about, like, were there any problems in utero, or what was that like?
Sure.
Or were there any developmental issues? And it's so interesting. I wouldn't say that this happens 100% of the time, but there does seem to be a correlation with babies that are born on their due date tend to be a bit anal and very punctual.
Ooh. Okay.
Which is fascinating.
Okay. So then from that, I would imagine there has to be an idea that if you're late, there's certain personality traits, maybe like more dependent on mom, maybe just happy-go-lucky, not super interested in joining the world after there's all that comfort, or like early, I don't know, want to be safe and escape. That's a dissertation idea for any listeners out there. Due date and relationship, specifically with mom, I think, since you're in mom's womb.
Yeah.
That's intriguing.
That is intriguing. That is intriguing.
So I know of somebody who was a breech baby, and the doctor tried so hard to turn them around. It worked a little bit, but they would go right back. Eventually, they needed to have a C-section. And your due date comment made me think of how stubborn this person is. And so I wonder if that's a trait, right? Like, I'm not going to turn around.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be a little bit stubborn when I come out, which isn't a bad thing. But it also made me think of my own pregnancy. My child had his head on my left hip bone for months. And then since he's been out into the world, he would always end up in the corner of a crib. He always wants like something on his head.
Wow.
Right? So he likes hats. He will tolerate my hand on his head, those kind of things. And he also had his legs crossed almost every time I saw him in the wombs, in the ultrasounds. And he still does it.
Wow.
He still always crosses. If he's sitting down, his legs are crossed. So it's just things that start in the womb, right? They kind of, I don't know, maybe stay a little bit. I heard, and I can't place this source, but I heard somebody who, when she was nursing, she would always rub her thumb on the inside of her baby's hand. And I think her baby was 17. 17. She was upset, went to mom for comfort, and that's what mom does. Rub the inside of her hand, and that's comfort.
Wow. Wow. That is so interesting that we start to see these nuanced characteristics, or how we respond to attachment, or how we respond to loved ones. We start to see that really, really early, sometimes before the baby even comes out of the womb, is what I'm hearing.
I would agree with that. And just another simplistic example, right? Siblings. A lot of times siblings are day and night, completely different. Came from the same two people and so different.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. So it's interesting because if we're talking about siblings and genetics and everything like that, Personality is kind of it is an internal thing, but it's expressed through interaction with the environment, which is why it's so important. But let's back up a little bit. So, what is personality anyway?
So, interesting. I have some definitions. If we go back to the Latin, the word persona refers to a theatrical mask worn by performers to play roles or to disguise their identities. So this is super interesting, right? So some personality theorists would say that personality is a reaction, that it's a way to conceal what's going on deep inside. But others would say that personality reveals what's going on deep inside. So reveal or conceal. And I think it's possible to be both, actually.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, this is getting good. Okay. So I want to check out the APA and their definition. So the APA is the American Psychological Association. So that is our governing body for psychology. Theirs is really long, but I'm going to pull that up over here and I'm going to try to condense and paraphrase what the APA has to say about personality. Okay. So personality is the enduring characteristics and behavior affected by an individual's unique adjustment to life. And parts of that personality include major traits, interests, drives, values, self-concept, abilities, and emotional patterns. Personality is complex and shaped by many forces, including heredity, physical age or development, early training, identification with significant individuals and groups, and culturally conditioned values and roles, and critical experiences and relationships. Overall, personality helps determine behavior.
So much there. There's so much there.
Okay, I want to break this down because this is a lot to digest. So the enduring characteristics and behavior. So the word enduring means it's persistent. It's perhaps lifelong. So the lifelong characteristics and behavior affected by an individual's unique adjustment to life. So this is how we interact with the environment and our world. And then this includes traits, things that we're interested in, drives. So like what drives our engine, what we're passionate about, what propels us forward in life, what we value, self-concept or how we view ourselves, how we feel about ourselves, self-esteem, our abilities or talents, and emotional patterns. So maybe the natural way that we emote or feel things. And then, of course, what's in our genetic makeup also influences personality. If we look back at what our parents passed down to us, that can influence personality, as well as just how we're made, how we come out of the womb, how we are baking in the womb, so to speak, when we're still in the oven. Our physical age and development, so meaning how old we are, how mature we are. Even the physical body that houses our personality can affect our personality, which is so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Early training is basically childhood, early training. So school, parenting, things that have influenced the kiddo, but really all of childhood affects personality.
All the things, yeah.
Identification with significant individuals and groups. So I think this is like social likes and dislikes or groups that we identify with naturally. Like, hey, I'm going to hang out with the theater kids over here, or hey, I'm hanging out with the baseball kids, or I'm more like these people. I dress more like these people. I like these people's style. So who we naturally associate with can help shape our personality. And then culturally conditioned values and roles. So thinking about culture, certain cultures allow or disallow certain behaviors and expression through dress, how we dress, nonverbals, what's appropriate within each gender, across genders, but just thinking of cultures outside of our own where maybe the head has to be covered or arms have to be covered. Any sort of cultural norms around dress can affect how we view ourselves, our personality, all of it. And then critical experiences and relationships. This is going to be significant role models. So attachment figures, parents, maybe a mentor at a critical time, but also traumatic experiences can shape personality as well. And then again, overall, personality helps determine behavior. So that is a super long definition, but comprehensive. I would expect nothing less from the APA.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I think there's one more definition that I found, and it's from Britannica, and it pulls out another piece of personality that I think is helpful. And it says, personality distinguishes one person from another.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
So really, personality it's these intangible parts of ourselves. It's inside. We can't always see it overtly, but we can often through behavior. Behavior gives us clues, like little nuggets or breadcrumbs about personality. But it really is kind of an intangible, often philosophical way of understanding people, which I imagine is why we have so many different ways to classify it, because it's like, what is it? How do we define it? It can be difficult to easily define.
Right. It's much easier to study the things we can see than the things that we can't necessarily see.
Yes. Very, very much so. All right. So hearing all of this, these definitions, and thinking about what this means, is there any wonder why we have so many different classifications of personality? There's so many different ways that we can categorize and break things down, and there's no one right answer. But I think it would be interesting for our listeners if we went through, not all of them. We don't have the time to go through all of them, and we probably don't even know all the different classifications, but some of the ones that were the most significant over history. And I'll start. And the one that comes to mind is from ancient Greece. So I'm curious, Cheyenne, how do you think in ancient Greece, so like 460 BC, how do you think they would have classified personality way, way back when?
Goodness, I imagine it's philosophical. That's the first thing that comes to my mind when I think about that far back. I can't imagine it was super dynamic, maybe just categories. Good, bad. Tell me more. I'm so interested.
Well, you're on the right path for sure. So Hippocrates actually was the one to first categorize people by their poop, by their snot, and by their blood.
Of course, why not? That's a great way to classify.
Right? So
Also, that's pretty gross.
it is gross. It is definitely gross. But this is where the Four Temperaments comes from. So the sanguine, choleric, phlegmatic, and melancholy. So the people were classified based on if they had too much or how much black bile they had, yellow bile they had, their blood, and then also how much mucus or phlegm they had. And so then again came sanguine, choleric, phlegmatic, melancholy.
I don't even know what to say about that. That is mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's something else. It's something else. I still love this classification of personalities. This is actually one of the first ones that I learned when I was in high school, and I gave my friends this personality test in a little book. And the way that the bodily functions, if you will, classified people, the traits were like sunny, a more sunny disposition, a happy disposition, which was sanguine. And then you had the characters that were more like to be in control, like to take charge. That's choleric. And then you have phlegmatic, which is the excess phlegm people, that they were more passive, wanted to please everyone, wanted to go with the flow, didn't want to rock the boat, the peacemakers. And then we have melancholy, which are kind of the beavers, if you will, putting in all the details and very detail oriented, like a beaver putting all the sticks and very meticulous with things. So that is still helpful to classify people. I don't know if it has anything to do with how much of the bodily functions or bodily fluid we have going on. I can't answer that. But I think perhaps that is still a helpful way to understand people and to categorize them.
So at the foundation, right, there's categories. There's 4 categories that are associated with certain types of presentations. And I think, interestingly, even though I think it's pretty gross, it's connected to the body. So when you were talking, that made me think about, like those who tend to be more anxious might have more stomach problems, maybe headaches, those kind of things. So mind-body connection that exists. But those categories, I'm not aware of exactly when, but the Enneagram formed at some point. It has a very long history. So that has 9 categories. So we went from 4 to 9 at some point, and those 9 categories can be broken down, and it's a dynamic theory. It's a very dynamic classification. But I know that started in, I believe, religious texts, and it's been studied and taught, adapted, expanded as the years have gone on.
Yeah.
We also have the father, of course, of psychoanalysis or psychology, which really personality study started before Mr. Freud, before the early 1900s about. But he had a personality category that really focused more on like libido and aggression, which is always interesting.
Yeah. I think he probably had a personality himself.
Well, Doc Bach, we all have personalities. And also his was very big and rigid and possibly narcissistic. Possibly. I don't know.
Yeah, it was flavorful, we'll say.
There we go. It's flavorful. Yeah. So I believe it was one of his students. So Jung went on to have a pretty in-depth personality theory as well, which ended up being like adapted kind of into the Myers-Briggs test, which is still popular today. So the Myers-Briggs is introversion, extroversion, so I or E. It's intuitive or sensing, which is N or S. Feeling or thinking, F and T. And then perceptive and judgment, so P or J. So you can, we're up to 16 categories for that one.
Yeah.
The Myers-Briggs was about 1943, I think it was set out, but then the Big Five, that one was 1949. So that's also OCEAN, the acronym OCEAN. So character traits such as openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Neuroticism kind of means like mood stability.
Mm-hmm.
But kind of around the same time, so 1950s, cardiologists, not even psychologists, cardiologists were typing people based on their personality and their reaction to stress.
Ooh.
So have you ever heard of type A and type B?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. What comes to mind when you think of that?
Yeah, so type A is like the get it done, often really competitive and very organized, a little bit more anxious energy, chip, chop, chip, get it done. Versus type B is going to be more laid back and go with the flow, let it be what it is. Yeah, those types.
Yeah. So apparently there's also a type C and a type D. But again, it was medically based. It's personality based on one's reaction to stress. So that's interesting. And then similarly, we have around 1952, we have the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. So that's our big book that we use to make mental health diagnoses. In 1952, there was not really a good personality classification, at least of personality at the disorder level. That didn't come until 1980. So almost 3 decades later, when we were finally thinking, oh, you know what? Maybe we should be research backed. So there was major study on personality. And then there were personality disorder categories finally introduced in the DSM-3 in the 1980s.
Interesting.
But what does disorder level even mean? Like, what are the signs of disorder level personality?
In order to answer that question, I want to go to the DSM to see what they have to say about personality disorders. So their definition here is it is an enduring pattern of inner experiences and behavior that deviates markedly from the expectations of the individual's culture. It is pervasive and inflexible and has an onset in adolescence or early adulthood. It is stable over time and leads to distress or impairment. Okay, so let's break that down a little bit. So an enduring pattern, this is very similar to the definition, to the APA's definition of personality, that this is persistent, that there is perhaps even a lifelong pattern of personality flavorfulness, if you will, what they say, inner experience. And
so it's not the 15 minutes in the morning before you have your coffee.
No.
Lifelong.
No, it is not your pre-caffeine ultra ego that shows up in the morning. That's not a disorder. Typically. But what the DSM is talking about is that this is persistent, that it is ongoing, and it deviates from what the culture would expect. So this person stands out, is what that's saying. That the herd, the group, is notices that this behavior, this personality is different. It goes against the grain of the culture. And it's pervasive, again, so occurring in most settings across multiple domains. So this isn't just, the personality that shows up at school because we're cranky and we don't like to go to school, but it shows up, it's pervasive in most settings. It's inflexible. So this is one of the hallmark signs of a personality disorder is inflexibility or rigidity or being rigid, that the person isn't able to adapt to what needs to happen in society, whether it's kind of just the flow of socially, this is what people do. Socially, this is how we handle things. There's a rigidity and perhaps a set of internal rules or expectations, or maybe a breakdown psychologically that leads to that set of rules or this rigidity, or seeing things maybe a bit more through narrow lenses. And it occurs pretty early. So the DSM says you start to notice this really in adolescence or early adulthood, right as the brain is starting to fully develop. So around age 25 is when we think the brain starts to fully develop, about that time. So in that season, that chapter of life of developing, you're going to see those flavors of personality come out, especially if they are not serving the person. They're actually working against the person, and it's making it really hard for them to function in society because the rest of the world is going this way, expectations are this way, and this person's going the other way. And what's interesting with personality too is as far as how young you can start to see these signs. I think we've already alluded to this with personality in general, that we can often tell at least little nuggets in the womb. But personality pathology wise, I've seen it as young as 6, at least traits start to pop up where, there's major issues with attachment figures, typically parents or caregivers. There's a breakdown in relationships with peers, perhaps major emotional reactions as well, sometimes as a part of that. But we want to be careful not to overdiagnose kiddos because they're still growing, right? They're still learning, they're still developing, and kids are so malleable. They grow and they change constantly. So we want to be very careful with diagnosing that early. And I think even DSM talks about, 18 or above, like personality disorders really need to be an adult classification. However, you can often see those warning signs. And I think it's helpful to talk about the warning signs to get help in place really, really early. The sooner, the better. And I will say too, some researchers say that you can see personality pathology developing as early as age 5. It is stable over time. We've already established that. And it leads to distress or impairment. This is the other piece that I think is really important. The distress or impairment also doesn't always have to be just the individual feeling the distress or impairment, that others around them are also noticing, hey, this is actually really interfering with our relationship. It's interfering with this person's ability to get a job, keep a job. It's interfering with relationships at school, with peers. sometimes others will be the ones to point that out, because the individual whose personality is not serving them, who has traits that aren't serving them, is not able to see it, because sometimes it's projected onto other people, meaning, oh, well, that person's the problem. That person's the problem. Everyone else is the problem. I'm not the problem. And that's unfortunately sometimes the problem, is that the person is not able to see that their own personality is contributing to these issues in the social world that we live in. But signs that you can tell if there is potentially disorder level personality pathology is if there are constant ruptures in relationships, meaning maybe there's constant big blow-ups in relationships, or, you know, I have a best friend today and they're gone tomorrow. I have, you know, this person over here and then they're out. Like, it's just constant people in and out, because keeping relationships is really challenging. Or it could be that the relationships that they do have are really fraught with tension, constant tension and conflict and fighting, and sometimes even leading to aggression towards one another, in a way that is not healthy and not helpful at all. But really, that can extend beyond our family relationships and intimate partner relationships to just socialization in general. Anything that requires socializing and relationships and people in our world, like I said, like having a job, going to school, keeping a job, if the person is unable to, keep meaningful employment, there's constant turnover. Like, oh, you know, I'm at this job for 1 month, then I'm on to the next. At that job for another month, on to the next, because I had to blow up with the boss. I had to blow up with a coworker. I don't like this. And it just goes on, because the individual is perhaps not able to adapt to the expectations of the work environment, of the social world. You think about kind of the different micro and macro layers here, that we all have certain rules that we have to follow in society. And if there's personality dysfunction, it can be really challenging to follow those certain rules of society. So those are some signs that perhaps you need to see someone if you're seeing a lot of issues in relationships and disruptions in how you interact with the social world.
I was thinking, when you were talking about childhood personality traits, adolescent, teenage years, I just want to reiterate how important it is to not over-pathologize, over-diagnose, view behavior as not changeable, as a piece that is set in stone and the kiddo's fault or the teenager's fault. Because I think it's helpful. Well, it's not perhaps helpful to diagnose early as far as like a label. It is very, very helpful for the trajectory of treatment.
Yes.
Because the earlier that you can get treatment for those things, the better chances, or the better the prognosis, the better chances there is to get better. So maybe at some point we're not living in that disorder level space. We can adapt.
Yeah. Yeah. You're absolutely right. I think we have to be careful in not overdiagnosing the littles, because there can be all kinds of things going on in the home or in other environments that are maintaining these behaviors, and they aren't necessarily indicative of personality pathology per se, but getting the right supports in place ahead of time, staying ahead of that trajectory, is going to be important so that it doesn't become something bigger. Yeah. So it's a balance between like, hey, there's some warning signs here. There's some possible traits of this, but there's also this going on here that's reinforcing this behavior. Let's work on disrupting those reinforcers and, make some changes, some tweaks in the family and with maybe attachment figures. That's common, very common, having to work with the parents or caregivers with the kiddo. But yeah, we want to be very, very careful and not be heavy-handed. I totally agree.
Oh my goodness. So we have covered a lot of things today. What have we learned, Doc Bach?
Yeah, great question. So we have talked a little bit about why personality is a thing, why we categorize people. We have explored some definitions from the APA and from Britannica. We have explored a little bit about personality history and different classifications that we've had throughout the years, starting with Hippocrates all the way up through DSM. And then with that, we also touched briefly on disorder level personality or personality disorders, personality pathology. We touched on that just a little bit too. So there's so much more that we could say, but we already have been talking for a while. So you will have to join us next time to hear more. All right, that brings us to a close. Thank you for joining us today on the topic of personality. If you enjoy the Personality Couch, please rate and review us on your favorite podcast app. And you don't want to miss our upcoming series on personality disorders and borderline personality. Until next time, be well, be kind, and join us for the next episode on the Personality Couch. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute a professional relationship. If you're in need of professional help, please seek out appropriate resources in your area. Information about clinical trends or diagnoses are discussed in broad and universal terms and do not refer to any specific person or case.